We should find a way to harmonize there, like a
I
barbershop.
thought we were about to barbershop quartet that.
I was
just waiting.
I was going to put out just a real soft C and see where everybody follows along, because that's how we usually start these things out. Welcome back, everybody. It's the One's Ready podcast. You got the whole team with you. Our friend Kyle came to sit down and talk about a myriad of subjects, some of which we had to say before we recorded because they were not fit for human consumption. But here we are. So welcome back. Thanks for following, liking, subscribing to everything that we do. Our friend Kyle Petitt, Air Force veteran, real estate mogul, I'd like to say. I don't know how the terms work in the real estate world, if I'm allowed to say mogul, but I assume you're on the same level as Donald Trump for how good you are at real estate, just on a smaller scale in Colorado Springs. So Kyle, welcome, man. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you. Thank you guys for having me.
Yeah, man, we really appreciate it. So for everybody out there, Kyle was in the Air Force before. We just talked. He spent 7 years at Cannon. So he's in the Cannon recovery group, and we're going to talk about how he's getting through that. But Kyle, just do us a favor and hit us off with the background. Let us know, who you are and how you came, most importantly, what was the decision matrix like of you getting into the Air Force?
Oh, yeah, that's a really easy one. I mean, I grew up in the military. Both my parents were in the Air Force. My mom was public affairs. My dad was a paralegal. So I grew up in that my whole life. And so I knew from like a super young age that I was going to join the military. 9/11 happened, it solidifies that. I think I was in sixth grade around the time of 9/11. So there was like no doubt ever in my mind. It was kind of just like, what was I going to do? And then as I was getting ready to graduate high school, got an ROTC scholarship, went out to Brigham Young University, did that whole thing, took a break in there, served a mission in Portugal. I was raised LDS, and then came back, finished up that. And that, I think there was an interesting point there because I wasn't really that excited about the Air Force, if I'm being totally honest. I think I originally wanted to be like an eye doctor, but then I went to college and realized school was way harder than high school was. And I was not that good at it. So I didn't really care about aviation. I thought it was boring and dumb. And I was like, why would I just want to drive a bus, right? Like, I don't like driving that much. I ended up, anyway, going to flight school. I was a combat systems officer, went to flight school. And here in Pueblo, you go to initial flight training. And that was, I remember like sitting down on day one during the intros and listening to some of these pilots talk. And then when we started academics, I was just like, it was like fire hose, but like in the best way. I was super excited about it and realized that I actually really had like a passion for aviation, and super, super loved it. So anyway, ended up going back down to Pensacola for UCT, undergraduate CISO training. And then kind of the rest is history out of there, dropped gunships out of there, and then spent the rest of my life at Cannon.
That's awesome. So you, getting through pilot training, or not, through IFT and whatever else, I'm sure there were a crap ton of challenges. Did you ever kind of, waver in that, sort of desire to go into, the career field and start working for the Air Force? Because it sounds like you were pretty well set, growing up in that environment and having parents that were prior Air Force, and then, getting in and getting the fire hose of information and being excited about it. How did that actually shape you going through those hard times in flight school?
Interestingly enough, I don't think I really did waver in the decision. I think if I wavered in any part of the decision, my intention was not to be a combat systems officer or a CISO. Mm-hmm. That was not my intention, especially once I decided like, oh, aviation is dope. I really, really enjoy this. At that point, it was like, how can I go from like CISO training to pilot training? Because nobody knows what a CISO is. It's so annoying.
Sure. Right.
Everybody thinks pilots are these magical beings.
What is a CISO? I'm asking for a friend. It's me. I'm the friend. I don't know what a CISO does.
So a CISO kind of breaks up in three categories. It's electronic warfare officers, navigators, and weapons systems officers. And then there's a CISO. So all CISOs are those things. But so like the easiest way is you have a like Top Gun, right? Maverick and Goose.
I'm familiar, right? Those guys are in the Navy.
Yeah.
Heard of it.
So that's actually NFL. Anyway, so it's like that backseater. It's the guy that does really all the work in the jet, and the pilot just flies the bus.
Got it.
Yeah, we
Makes
fly on all
sense.
kinds of aircraft. So for educational purposes, obviously AC-130s, hello, F-15s, B-1s, EC-130s, RC-135s have a ton of like electronic warfare officers, B-52s. So it's kind of like
So you're
those crew
Goose.
heavy aircraft. What'd you say?
You're Goose. We just
Yeah.
figured it out. That's
Yeah, for sure.
That's
Totally.
easy as-
Thanks.
Totally.
Appreciate that.
You're totally Goose.
Yeah.
Canopy. I can't believe a canopy took you down. So as you get out of, you get out of training and you hit your first duty station over at Canon, you really start doing, it's sort of the fulfillment of what you got in to do. So you went from, growing up in the Air Force family, and then you obviously 9/11, changed your worldview, as it did all of us here. All of us are GWAT bros. So we all understand that. You finally get to Canon. How long was it from the time that you got to Canon until you finally got to go out the door and do the job that you got in to do?
Yeah. So when I got to Canon in 2015, the beginning of 2015, it was an interesting time because ISIS had pretty much just like hit its peak, right? I think like that year before. And when that happened, pretty much the entire gunship community out of Canon deployed. And so when I got there, I did SEER, and then I was there. That's where our schoolhouse is for gunships, at least for the model that I was flying on. So it was a wild time because there was like nobody there. There was like 2 instructors, and then like all these students, we just kept showing up. So we had a pretty long backlog. I remember sitting for like 6 months, not doing anything except like we'd do a lot of Op4 stuff for the training sorties and go out to Melrose Range and do all that kind of stuff. And then training, I think, took about 6 months ish. I guess, I don't know if you call it graduated. I don't know. I had my check ride. It was actually on my little brother's birthday. So it was January 11th of 2016. And then I ended up deploying about 4 or 5 months later after that, my first deployment. At the time, we were flying out of Turkey, and then we were doing ops in Syria. So in the gunship community, at that time, there was only 2 gunship squadrons. Now there's 4. There's probably going to be 2 again soon. But at that time, the way that we kind of broke up the AORs was the 16th, or the Spectre gunship, which was the AC-130 Whiskey. We pretty much had all of OIR, so Iraq and Syria. And then the 4th, which is out of Florida, that was the U models at the time. They were basically doing everything in Afghanistan. So pretty much my entire career until the very end during the withdrawal was pretty much all OIR. So it was that summer of 2016, got out of my first rotation.
So you got over there on your first deployment. How many of the stories from the instructors turned out to be like utter nonsense? Just like self-aggrandizing, like over the top stories from instructors that you got there and you're like, this isn't like what they said it was going to be like at all.
Not that many, if I'm being honest.
Yeah.
The gunship community, I mean, I would say the only time that we really experienced that was like when you were hearing stories from Afghanistan, because the fight in Afghanistan was totally different. And just the way that we employed and the threat picture and just everything was so different than this fight with ISIS. And so I actually really, generally speaking, I thought that, when I was a student, when I was growing up in the gunship and getting my whereabouts, the training was really freaking hard. The scenarios that we would do, we do dry fires. I don't know if the audience knows what that is, but you go play pretend war and you have these scenarios as if you were doing a direct action mission or, whatever it is. And, of course they're like super, super, super complicated. But it's kind of like, obviously it's like throwing the whole kitchen sink at you. So when you were there, did that really happen? No, but I never felt like, the instructors were just like full of shit, giving us a bunch of stuff that was like totally irrelevant.
Well, I assume most of your instructors had already been, overseas in one of those theaters. So it's one of those things where I know our students will be like, why are you guys so crazy about this stuff? And it's like, training tends to get harder the more combat vets you get back into the pipeline as instructors, because we're like, we take all this stuff super seriously, guys. And like, I think sometimes the students are like, it can't be that crazy. And then it all makes sense later on.
I love it too. The students are like, well, this scenario would never happen. You'd never take this much contact. There'd never be this much out for it. We're like, yeah, but what if there is? That's what we're training for, bro. What if it does get this complicated? Like, that's why we train this way. I always likened it to weightlifting. Somebody's, hey, this set is going to be close to your max and you're going to have to do it for 3 reps. Be like, oh, well, I mean, I'm never going to have to do like a max rep for 3 sets. Be like, yeah, but that's the point. You add extra stress in order to get past your 100%.
Well, and I mean, to fast forward, like when I became an instructor, like now you're running these dry fire scenarios as the same thing happens for you guys. And half of my dry fire scenarios were either things that I had encountered or, not every gunship mission is like this big heroic you're shooting. I mean, half the time you're just flying and watching, but you're still having the conversation as a crew of like, hey, that you're watching what's happening and it's like, what if this plays out? And then you like kind of take this little note and you're like, man, I would say this all the time. I'm going to turn that into a scenario for students during upgrade when I get back, because that would freaking suck. Additionally, you guys know who Nick Lavery is?
Yes.
Nick Lavery, the Green Beret, got his leg blown off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do know.
Why'd you get so excited?
Yeah.
He just knows everyone.
Because
Yeah.
Why'd I get so
his
excited?
voice even got high pitched.
Hey, the coffee's kicking in. I'm good.
Shout out to Trench Coffee. Shout out to Trench. The boys out there are always getting peaches jazzed up.
But so Nick Lavery's story, I had heard it on, a couple podcasts. I was super obsessed with his story. He's an absolute animal. So for those who don't know, had a green on blue, got basically shot with a PKM, ended up losing his leg. And then within 24 months was on a deployment again as a Green Beret. And he's gone on multiple deployments and he's an absolute animal. Anyway, he's got this Boston accent. It's so cool. And when I heard that story, I was like, man, that would be such a sucky scenario to get drawn into as a gunship. Like, this green on blue that became a complex ambush from the mountains. And you're like, it's not really. It's like, no, this is his story. Listen to it. This is the scenario that we're going to fly tomorrow. So I mean, it's drawn from real life scenarios or the potential for scenarios that could have happened while you were there,
And like when you run into a scenario like that or whatever, the communication of your crew, like I want to talk about your relationship up there. Like it has to be crazy because you're trying to suss out friendlies from enemies and like there's some mixtures going on in like that scenario specifically. So like how is it with the AC-130 crew? How tight are y'all and what are like the most important aspects to make that crew successful?
That's such a good question. So quick crew breakdown, the way that it sits right now, the crew names are a little bit different, but basically you have your pilot and co-pilot, right, sitting up front. And then you have 2 CISOs, a junior and a senior typically. And then you have 3 or 4 enlisted gunners. Generally what's happening is the combat systems officers, what we're doing on the plane is, we've got like the defensive systems and we do in-flight planning and fuel planning and stuff like that. But then like once you're in combat or you're entering into the combat environment, both CISOs are sitting in the back at this like super big Stephen Hawking like computer station, super gaming. And you both have a sensor. So one is on the nose and then one is right under the 30 mil. And so the senior of the two, which in the AC-130J, which is the gunship flying everywhere today, is called the WISO, the Weapons Systems Officer. So he or she is the one like running the show, honestly. That's the one talking to the JTAC. They do the bulk of the mission planning. He's directing, the younger CISO on what that person should be doing. So generally speaking, like it's pretty clear who is responsible for what. At the same time, the aircraft commander, right, who is ultimately in charge of everything, is the person coordinating and kind of has this almost like this God's eye view of what's happening, right? Like that your pilot is like listening to ATC, they're listening to TACCOM, they're listening to the JTAC, they're listening on SAT, and they're kind of just like gathering all the pieces. So therein lies like a really, really important relationship because they're also trying to keep you safe and they're trying to maneuver the aircraft in a way that like you're not going to get shot down at least. So the relationship, first and foremost, the most important relationship is that relationship between your WISO for AC-130Js, you're senior and you're senior. And I've seen it play out both ways. I've had good relationships and bad relationships, but when you deploy on a hard crew. So you're with those same people for whatever it is, the 3 to 6 months. And it's really kind of this almost like mom and dad relationship, which was, full disclosure, was, I thought was going to be pretty hard. I was super fortunate. The last trip that I went on, the pilot that I had was like really intelligent, really sharp, and a really good decision maker. And he was so good. I'd never seen any other pilot do this. He was so good at like bringing in your youngest gunner, right? I mean, your E3, and being like, hey, we're making a decision to go do this. How do you feel about it? So that was like, when I saw it operating at its best, it was pulling input from everybody, if that makes sense. And then additionally, I think it really just speaks to, you have to be a tactical expert. There's, like the pilot is trusting that I know how to employ weapons, and that I know which weapons to choose, and that I know how to handle complex tactical scenarios, because he or she just has this like little tiny monitor, right? Like they can see outside the plane, but they really just have this like little repeater so that they can see what's going on the ground. So they're really like trying to build this thing and watch this tiny screen and fly the airplane. And they have a lot going on. So they're really relying on me, or whoever the Wizzo is at the time, to be a tactical expert and to be competent, so that really they just are doing a sanity check, and it's not like they're the ones running it. But of course, there's personality conflicts, happen all the time, but that's kind of the general flow there. And the last thing that I'll say actually is that when you're hashing out duties, so I'll just say like, I'm the Wizzo, I'm talking to the JTAC, I'm kind of running the mission. And the younger CISO, generally speaking, especially if it's a DA, his or her job is 100% friendly management. So they are like, from the time that the helos pull in, or the vehicles or whatever it is like dropping little points and tracking, and constantly, no matter how boring or how long, that is like all that person is doing, so that we can react super quickly and I can focus on a little bit being more offensive.
Yeah, I think it was Dan Schilling in the book Alone at Dawn, talking about the AC-130. It's the most friendly centric aircraft that we have. The only thing that they're doing is just tracking where friendlies are. That's it. That's our whole life, so that they can protect friendlies. Because if you know where the friendlies are, that means you know where the bad guys are, right? If you know where the friendlies aren't, you know where you can shoot 100% of the time, and the AC-130 does that. I just want to highlight something that you brought up when you were talking about bringing that young E3 in. When teams operate at their best, when leaders bring in those young folks to say, hey, how do you feel about this? We get this a lot, because people will ask us, hey, I want to have my opinion brought in. I want to be valued as a team member. People don't understand that the other side of that coin is you better hit a home run. If a true leader brings you in and has that faith in you, and you say something stupid, or you give bad input, or you're not the tactical expert, that can be as damaging to a team as a leader that doesn't listen to their subordinates. So you said it perfectly. I just wanted to kind of highlight, there's always a give and take. There's a push and pull. Like, good on that leader for bringing in the subordinate to say, hey, young E3 junior gunner, we're going to do this. How do you feel about it? People forget, though, you got to be on your game, because you have very few chances to step up in that role and go, well, I do feel good about it, and here's my lane, and I'm going to crush it inside of my lane. It was just a great story, the way that you told it, that highlights there's always a push and pull to that leadership, and what you need to do as a subordinate. So that was really good input, and good on that leader for doing it.
Yeah. Well, I really loved the way that he did it, because a lot of times it had to do with like crew duty day, or whether we were going to accept certain risk, right? Like, and yeah, you want these young guys to like know that they can speak up. I think one of the things that it did subconsciously is, like, from the very, very beginning, it taught them that their input was valuable. And like, look, I don't think any of us had unrealistic expectations, because our crew positions are different, right? Like, the gunners are not typically tactical experts. They're experts in these machines. They're essentially, they're called special missions aviators. So they're kind of like dual hatting, like load master. Now they're kind of triple hatting, like a little bit flight engineer, and they're operating these gun systems. But it taught them really, really early, like your input is valued, your input is valuable. And so like if you start getting those hairs stand up on the back of your neck, bro, speak up. This is a safe place. And we don't expect you to be like, have perfect knowledge. And in fact, sometimes it helped us reinforce, even if they did say something a little bit off the wall, which rarely happened. We had super sharp gunners on that trip. But if it did happen, it caused us to like reassess and be like, wait, no, that's not right. So that's actually not a valid fear, and we're good.
Well, that's one of the great things about like an AC-130 crew is just the amount of brains that are in there that are paying attention. So that whole crew resource management is important, not just from an aspect of keeping the plane, the crew safe, and doing smart things, but also the avoidance of any kind of fratricide or like, hey, I didn't get that on the radio because it was just garbled, or did you guys get that? And the flow of communications that you folks have up there is incredible. And I can only speak from a special missions aviator from a helicopter standpoint, because we have SMAs on helicopters, but there is equal part input between the pilot, the the WISO, the SMA, the load master, if you're on a normal C-130 or C-17 that are having these conversations like, hey, can we do this? Have we, no kidding, gotten enough sleep? Like, as simple as that, hey, we've been, we talked to, Voodoo a couple weeks ago about, like they had been flying for 30 something hours. And it's like, all right, we could press this, take some go pills and let's do it. But, maybe let's just get a nap in. It's silly and it sounds stupid, but it has saved lives. It has saved aircraft. And it's an important relationship to have. So I'm glad you brought it up.
Yeah. 100% agree.
Yeah. I want to revisit something just because from a, you talked about using real life scenarios to things that have happened to, really enhance training. Like we do the same thing, like the Jays do the same thing with medical scenarios. For me being a JTAC, we do the same thing, multi-axis troops and contacts, and it's crazy. How many of those kind of real world scenarios that were, I'm kind of, what, I feel like I'm double tapping a question here, really, but how many of those real life scenarios did you guys implement in there? And really, see,
I got you. I got you.
You get what I'm saying?
Let me put it like this. I would come home from deployment and I would open my Zipper email, little secret email. And I would literally pull products from downrange, and then I would just remove everything secret, change a bunch of call signs, and then like change the maps and be like, okay, we're flying to Hereford or Lubbock or just staying over Clovis or going out to the range. So they were literally built exactly off of scenarios. A lot of guys, a lot of just people in the community keep some form of a journal, For me, it was, I kept it like at the end. You have your flight log and all that stuff. And then I'd get home and super random, I would fly multiple flags every deployment. And I had like mine, but, bring one home, give it to mom. But what I like to do with those is I would actually write up like kind of a full, obviously unclassified summary of like, what did this flag see and do? And that helped kind of cement in my mind, but then also turn around and be like, build scenarios and operate accordingly. And then like listening to podcasts like this, or Cleared Hot or Sean Ryan show, where these guys are telling their incredible war stories. I mean, that was how I found Nick Lavery. Nice. That was how I found Nick Lavery, and then built that scenario. And then of course, after action reports too, like you'll see AARs and then build scenarios off of that as well.
Yeah. The flag thing's a big thing. Like for JTACs, usually we get these. So for everybody that's out there, if you're not watching YouTube, I'm holding up a 105 shell, because, a lot of what's kind of cool about that, and just to get sentimental real quick, is, we get people that die or get hurt in troops and contacts, and it means a lot from us to us on the ground whenever we have, whether it's AC-130, A-10, whatever aircraft you want to call that helps us out, and to come back and get something that smoked somebody that helped us get out of a tick is pretty awesome. So anyway, thought I'd share that since you brought up the flag thing.
Well, there was, I know we said we were going to do this, but there was once upon a time a commander in AFSOC that put a total kibosh on that. And listen, I have to bring it up because I see it happening in Paycom right now. I mean, I'm not in Paycom, nor have I ever been to Paycom, but I have friends that are there right now that are kind of posting some of the things that seem to be happening that are kind of starting to crush morale, or not even really crush morale, but it's like, it feels like it's reeling people in so hard. So there's, stuff about morale shirts and, whatever. And it's like, sometimes these little things, I don't know how leaders get to this point where they make this decision that, like, you know what? This little thing that sparks joy for you, it doesn't spark joy for you anymore. No more brass. No more little pen tab patches. No, colored shirts. No call signs. You're going to be addressing people by, rank and last name. And like, at some point, I think that their thought process a lot of the times is like, oh, well, if, it's a slippery slope. And if we clean up these little things, it'll lead to, more discipline and whatever. And I'm like, I don't think that's true. I don't think it's accurate. I think it just builds resentment. And I think people are still going to try to do those things, and they're going to do it in secret. Like, I'm still going to call this guy by his first name when you're not around, but it's just like I'm walking on pins and needles. So that we no kidding. It wasn't my crew, but we had a crew. That policy came down. We had done an op with the task force over in Iraq and Syria, given them brass after, like, we had all conglomerated together. They had the detainee, passed them some brass, and then it came down like a super hammer. And I'm not kidding you. They were ordered to gen up a sortie, fly to the ETF's base, pick up the brass, like in combat. This is, you can't make this up. This is why I had to bring it up, because it was like, it became so, like, that is so dumb. We're going to gen up a sortie, go fly in a combat environment where there is threat, just to go up there, land, get that brass back. Like, what? So anyway, hold on to that piece of
I'm going to. It's you brought it up, so.
Oh no!
So I even text. Like we said, Aaron, Trent, and I will text back and forth just to make sure that we don't jump on each other here. But I even text. I was like, oh, here we go. So the slippery slope fallacy, right?
Oh my God!
There are, and this is, I guess there are both sides to it, right? There's one side is you got the broken window theory, where it's like, hey, we're just going to clean everything up. It's going to be extremely strict, and it's the Rudy Giuliani of New York. We're going to clean it up. It is undeniable that New York got cleaned up after Rudy Giuliani, right? However, I also think that morale shirts, morale patches, or whatever it is not a broken window kind of thing. Right? It is like handing out 105 shells after dudes got in a tick and lives were lost. And like, that's not a broken window thing. That is not a war trophy. That is and I think leadership can get detached. And I'll say that because, you go up to a staff, whether it's AFSOC or SOCOM or something like that, and you go up to a staff and you sometimes, not everybody, but you can sometimes lose your mind because you forget that now that you've gone and kind of separated yourself, taking yourself out of that operational grind, and you get some rest and all that kind of stuff. You kind of look back and you can, not saying I did, but I'm just saying you can forget what it was like, and you start from your ivory tower just picking things apart, and you forget, like, there are folks in the trenches freaking just getting it after it, making sure that the mission is successful, giving their absolute everything, working 18-hour days to make sure that that sortie goes, or that these PJs or JTACs or whatever are trained to step out the door. You forget all the work and effort and lack of family time and trip after trip after trip to make sure that we are ready to go. And you can, like I said, I'm not saying I forgot it, because I would never do that.
Present company excluded. The chief is clean on this one.
I'm clean. But you forget, and you forget what it was like. Or maybe you just missed the boat, so you're fucking pissed about it. I don't know.
I think...
you know what I think?
Yeah, I think CZ, Kyle, I'll turn it over to you here in a second, but I think CZ... I think this is his quote, and I think he distilled it down. It was either him or somebody else that attributed it to him, but he said, if it matters to the team, if it matters to the bros, it matters. And I don't know what happens at that 04 E9 sort of lobotomy area where people forget, but they look at things that matter to people, like the 105 shells, the given, the morale shirts, those little things, they matter to the teams. Like, okay, the short sleeve rugby shirt was like the biggest scandal in the 2-4 Sal for like 2 years, right? Like, God forbid you're in the Philippines at 110 degrees and 100% humidity and you put on a short sleeve rugby shirt for training one day. Because God forbid if a picture on a sit rep ever had a short sleeve rugby shirt on, it was like the world fell down. Be like, you just forget. And, if it matters to the team, if it matters to the people on the ground, then it actually matters. It's not a slippery slope. It's not a lack of discipline. It's not all, if I can't trust you with a haircut, I can't trust you on target. No, maybe it's just because my hair got a little bit long. Maybe I'm not a POS, like there's a fine line there. And I don't know what happens at that 04. I don't know what school all majors and all chiefs go to where they collectively forget. But the second that you're an op soup and a DO, it's like, nah, man, you've forgotten what happens in the team rooms. But Kyle, go ahead. Sorry for.
Well, what's interesting is, like, in a gunship community, this is actually something really, really cool about a gunship community is that that disconnect, I think, happens way later because we have 04s shoot on that on my fourth deployment. There was a lieutenant colonel who was a crew dog, right? Like, nice. That doesn't happen really like anywhere else. I mean, it's super common in 03s, 04s, and the occasional 05 as a crew dog, which is pretty wild. Peaches, what I was thinking about when you were saying that, I think sometimes the disconnect, and look, I get it. It's, you're trying to make sure that the organization doesn't collapse or that a big event doesn't happen, because what happens if something does is then everybody comes back and they're like, well, I mean, you guys don't even have mustache and rigs. Like, what are these people? What are they embossing their boots properly? So, like, clearly that is what led to this mishap. And you're like, well, no.
But, did it though?
But did it? So here's the thing but one of the major, and now this goes both ways in all fairness, right? Because I've also had phenomenal leaders, but I think that one thing that just humans in general forget, whether it's leadership looking at subordinates or subordinates looking at leadership, is the general assumption that usually, most times, or almost all times, that person is actually trying their best, or they actually have good intentions, or they're actually not trying to have a mishap or like a bad thing happen, right? And I think that is like often forgotten. That, like, hey, these guys, maybe they're goofing around or whatever, but like when it comes to the mission, like they get it. Like your young PJs, they get it. Our young CISOs, like they get it. They just might have a different personality. And that's something that I see conflict a lot is like, well, you don't fit this personality mold. And so there can be a lot of conflict there. But the slippery slope thing,
It's maddening.
Well, it's and I'm actually glad you said that, Kyle, because I do think that it's so easy to sit back and just leadership is this, leadership is that. They're out to get us. That sure. Are there a few that are that probably are? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, but the majority, I would say, are not out. They're just like, they have their background, they have their certain, things, and it's not malicious, right? But when you start equating it to, the slippery slope or something like that, I think that's where it starts to go. I don't know, but so Aaron, with the rugby shirts, completely agree. That was a ridiculous thing, and
every sit rep, every
but-
single time it came out, like people would.
Yeah.
I got yelled at over the phone on a thing. He wasn't even my guy. That's the most frustrating one of my life.
Yeah,
we put out a
I
sit
remember
rep.
that.
We were working with a different team. It was a completely different dude, and I got straight like. A grown man raised his voice at me over the phone because of another team's dude that was like instructing, and he had sunglasses on his head and he had a rugby shirt on.
Yeah.
And I got yelled at over it.
Yeah.
I was dumbfounded. I was like, first of all, mind your tone. Second of all, it's not my guy. Like he was teaching, like what do you want me to tell you? Like that was a completely different unit. It wasn't even an ST guy. It was like a SEER guy from a different unit. They were like, how dare you? I was like, what are we talking about here?
Yeah. Like I said, people lose their minds, but but with that, like, yeah, the rugby shirt thing was ridiculous. But if you show up with fucking Vans, bandana shirt on, a fucking tank top, like,
right. That's
like,
a bridge too far.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
America.
Come on, dude.
America.
You know what I mean?
America.
You know
Moons
what I
out,
mean?
goons out,
but
bro.
There are dudes that think that like that's how they should be operating. It's like, hey, man,
I spent
for you.
Well, I spent a teeny tiny little bit of time at with a tier 1 unit and had some friends over there. And yeah, I mean, like they wear basically whatever they want. And I was like, so like, what's like the actual policy here? And his answer was literally, don't fuck it up for everybody else. It was like, when you're making these decisions, just don't fuck it up for everybody else. And unfortunately, the majority of the military, like we can't operate like that for a lot of reasons. We haven't gone through this like intense selection process. We haven't like weeded out whatever. But also on the same token is because another thing that goes along with that is like this feeling that like if one person shits themselves, then everybody's got to wear a diaper. Right. Which again, to me is like a little bit of it's lazy leadership to me. And I saw that a lot. And look, it was just so frustrating. It was like exactly what you're talking about, Aaron. You're like, bro, I don't even know this guy. He doesn't even go here.
He doesn't even go here.
Yeah. And I'm getting like hammered for this. And now we're going to feel the repercussions of it when it's like,
well, so when you have the individual and someone wants to put out a blanket policy, what leaders need to ask themselves when they're trying to solve problems is it their problem to solve? You know what I mean? Because I think as you grow in rank, like you have a greater breadth of responsibility, right? And so how do you solve problems at the senior leadership levels? You put out policies. Like that's what you do. It's very not individual based. And so the first question they should be asking themselves is this my problem to solve? Am I solving this individual problem? Like, is the mission being accomplished? Yes. Then is it really my problem? Like, is this a one-on-one conversation with someone to help them fix this problem? Or is it really none of my business? Like, do I need a policy for this entire unit, this entire organization, because something happened with one person? It's like, oh, you're just taking the leadership away from the person that should be solving that problem, if it even is a problem. So like asking if, they have all these causation correlation things, but like, if the mission is being accomplished, and you're in a senior leader position, like ask yourself, is this my problem to solve? Because the tools that you have at that level are going to crush a whole bunch of other people out there that are, just doing their job and doing the best they can. That's what I think.
Here to that. I
got it. So all those frustrations aside, we're going to keep going, Kyle. So, you decided to make the move, away from the Air Force, kind of away from the military. what was it like as you hit that transition process? Like, I know for all of us, we're really close. We're all, except for Peaches, who's going to be, a command wing super duper chief somewhere else. Trent and I are so super close to getting out. We're feeling, the stress of that transition. And, there's always, some days where you feel lost. There's some days where you're like, I'm unsure of the future. As you made that transition, what was, what was your goal in mind as you were moving through, like, on to the next thing? Like, did you know what you wanted to do, or did you have a path forward, or how did that work out?
Well, I think you're not alone in that feeling of like intrepidation as you approach separating from service, whether it's retirement or getting out early. I mean, like I said, from the time my first coherent thought was probably, I'm going to join the military. Right. And then I don't know if you did some math, but I did not do 20 years in the military. So that became like kind of a little bit of an identity change and crisis when I started to realize, like, I don't think I'm going to do this for my whole life. I think like there's some other things that I want to do with my life because I just want to do other things. And then it was the last deployment in 2021. I kind of was like toying with the idea. Okay, I think I'm gonna bail on this. Finish this deployment, which was super epic, and then I think I'm going to move on. But let me tell you, I read a book by Brene Brown. I don't know if you guys are familiar with old Brene, but she is awesome. And I believe the book was Dare to Lead, but I read like all of her books that summer. Anywho, and she was talking about, it was really beautiful. She was talking about how you really have to narrow down your core values, right? And which sounds really easy to do. But so she gives you like 3 pages, 2 or 3 columns, and it's like everything that it could be, right? And she's like, just go through and like circle all the ones that sound good. Sweet. Now cut that in half. Sweet. Now cut that in half again. Sweet. Now pick the two, maybe 3 that are the most important to you. And the reason why that was so important to do was because she was like, number one, it just helps you like have a guiding light, and understand yourself a little bit better. But what it also does is it allows you, sometimes the hardest decisions are like choosing between good and really good, or great and great, or bad and and what it does is it allows you to take these kind of core values, and then so you do your pro con list, you do all that stuff, and then it allowed me at least to do that and then bring in my core values and be like, now I'm going to make a decision based on that. So even if like ultimately like it wasn't the most profitable decision or the ultimate best one, I still felt good about it because I was very true to myself. Right. So what I had done to make the decision, I decided I was getting out, had some like personal life circumstances that I was like, okay, I am ready to do this. Now, what am I going to do? Well, I had heard about SkillBridge, which is awesome, which we could talk about that forever. Mm-hmm. And what I had also done is I had thought about the jobs that I had done when I wasn't flying, like my additional duties or whatever, my desk job, and which ones I loved and which ones I hated. I loved exercise planning. I had so much fun exercise planning. Teams would come in and I got to host and problem solve and network and coordinate and kind of be the hero and strategize and then
wait a second, you like exercise planning? You're a psychopath. Like, did anybody like that? I thought you were going somewhere completely there. I thought that was sarcastic. Nope. You actually like it? Oh my God. We found the one guy, everybody.
Well, what's funny is like I didn't really like the planning side of it. I like the execution side of it. But okay. And it was more so it just made me feel it kind of like hit like my core characteristics, which were those things and like engaging with people and all that. And then right after that, I went to another job where I was literally just like an Excel manager. All I did was manage this Excel spreadsheet and there was like no human interaction. It was like, yes or no, manually fill out this thing. And so like that helped me get rid of like so many things that I was like, I would hate that. And so then I looked at real estate and I had always been interested in real estate. I had, done a little bit of real estate investing, whatever. And I was like, man, this kind of sounds like it would kind of fit those strategizing and networking and problem solving and being the hero and, all those things. And so then I like called a friend and I was like, hey, could we like set up a skill bridge at your brokerage? She's like, I don't even know what that means, but yeah, talk to the CEO. And so we did that, set it up in like the fall of 2021, going into the beginning of 2022, which is when they changed their policy and have now like kind of, in some sense, OSD has kind of like ruined some things about it. It's just like getting programs approved and stuff like that. But anyway, so we were like right at the beginning of that. And then that was the way for me to transition. I don't think I would have had the guts, truthfully, to try to get into real estate had I not had the Skill Bridge program. Because like you go from a salary job to a commission job. You go from aviation and combat and then like not that, right? Like the total opposite. And it really gave me, I mean, I did it for about 5 months, but for those that don't know, you can do Skill Bridge for up to 6 months. And it really gave me this opportunity in a really like pretty safe and protected space to like try something. And I'm so glad that I did, because I've never been happier. I mean, I love this job.
Man, that's awesome. And that's exactly what SkillBridge is supposed to do. So for people that aren't tracking, we're not going to go too deep into it. Maybe we'll hit it deeper in a different podcast. But SkillBridge is essentially for transitioning Air Force. It's actually for all DoD members, but they'll give you 6 months of time to do exactly what Kyle's describing. You get to go to an approved program and work. Maybe it can be in a related field, it can be in a different field, but it's that the bridge, the literal skill bridge, like they're giving you skills to transition to civilian life. Great program. It's amazing. Everybody should take advantage of it. And it's something you can do, as Kyle said, after one enlistment or after a full 20 years of service. So it's awesome. Mm-hmm. So as you moved into that new space, right, you're literally starting to spread your wings and getting into real estate and stuff. What were some challenges that you faced there, and how much of it, how much of what you faced did you already know how to navigate thanks to your military service? Because people always ask us like, well, what can I do after getting out of AFSPEC war or getting out of special operations? And we're like, well, the sky's the limit, because you have all these tools to fix different problems. You just don't know it. People always want this answer like, well, what can a PJ do after the military? What can a special reconnaissance guy do afterwards? And we're like, there's no equivalent, but the sky's the limit. You can do whatever. Like, what tools did you already have from the military that you applied to help you be successful in the real estate space?
Okay. I love this question, because obviously,
thanks, me too, but it's because I'm a narcissist.
I love this question because it was what I asked myself every day once the little seed was in my head of like, you're going to get out, or maybe it was like, yeah, but what am I going to do? Because same problem. I run a sensor in the back of a plane and I shoot big guns at people. There's not a lot of civilian jobs that do that. And so it was like, yeah, how am I going to navigate that?
There's probably some guys in Mexico that would hire you.
Oh no, for sure. Like the dudes on the cartel, like on the border, cartel, like shooting drones. Like, oh my gosh, dude, that might be able to get me back in. But anyway, what was interesting though is like, as I started going through it, I started realizing that it was some of the soft skills that I had developed and practiced and exercised. So, and it doesn't sound super compelling, right? It really doesn't, because you feel like everybody has these skills, right? And like, especially if you have like an ounce of humility, you see other people and you're like, oh man, like I feel like that guy's got it all squared away. And like, man, I gotta like work on my stuff. But some of those soft skills that I have identified since is like decision making, like the ability to just make a decision and eat the consequences, right? And take some action. The ability to manage your own time and training, right? Like my own personal development for my business when I don't have a bunch of clients that I'm working with. Right? It's like, what am I doing in that downtime? It's the same as like, what are you doing when you're not flying or when you're not on an exercise or at an Emerald Warrior or whatever? It's like you're preparing for the big game. It's a lesson that, generally speaking, CAS teaches you, right? Is that, and also like the same things with, being a PJ and whatever, is that like game time is not the time to learn your TTPs. right? Like that time has passed. Now it's time to execute. And really it kind of puts you to the test. And that ability to, like, just that core understanding that that's how I have to operate and take advantage of quote unquote downtime. That's been one of the biggest translators. And I think there is something to be said about America 2023. You know, we're really fortunate to not be in a society like post-Vietnam where veterans were kind of like scoffed at and scorned at, right? Like there's a lot of respect, especially nowadays for the soft community. And it doesn't mean that we just go out and abuse it. And it's just like, well, you should hire me because I was in special operations or whatever.
No,
but
you shouldn't necessarily do that just right off the bat.
Yeah,
I gotta
reel
that
my
one
resume right now.
But that being said, there's a reason that people look at us, and I started to feel it very quickly, you know, after I got here, was I was like, oh, I operate at a different pace. I operate at a different level. I operate at a different level of independence. And I'm going to speak specifically to soft people right now, because I run our Skill Bridge program and I see the difference, and not even just soft people, but people in really combat arms. I see the difference when people come in and that was not their background, right? And it doesn't translate. So like those skills that, you know, when you're just getting beat down and in pipeline or selection or in combat or in AARs or in debriefs or whatever it is, they really are leading to like the development of you as a human. And I think ultimately have the potential to make you a more autonomous, more independent, better leader if you actually implement the lessons learned. And I think it's a reason why a lot of veterans, especially soft veterans, lean into entrepreneurship, right? Because like there's still this like excitement, there's this kind of like risk, there's a little bit of this danger, but it's also like when you're deployed versus being in garrison, all the little things, even like the things that you like don't really want to do, they still move the needle. And that feels so good. And that you find a lot in entrepreneurship or anything where you're kind of like running your own business or it's commission based or whatever.
Yeah, but that soft lifestyle and all the things that we've been through and the experiences, they do take a toll, right? And there are some things that you probably had to deal with once you got out to the other side. And how did you deal with some of those? You know, like we talk about like the psychological and all this other thing. I'm not saying you have problems, like whatever, but
that's
what is your beard hiding? You know.
Man, it's a complex question, but it's something that I am really, really passionate about because I've had friends affected worse than I have been. You know, there's psychological damage and there's trauma that I've experienced, and I've been pretty fortunate in the way that my brain just happens to be wired. But it's not like that for everybody. And by the way, this is not just if you're a combat veteran, you know, it's trauma in general for people. I started getting really interested in the psychedelic assisted therapies. I started getting interested in it thanks to the prophet Joe Rogan, blessed be his name. He had somebody on.
Our Lord and Savior.
Don't worry. He listens to the podcast. So shout out Joe. What's up?
Yeah.
Really
What's up, Joe?
You. Yeah. Thanks for the support, man. He's been one of the day ones, honestly. Like, he shoots me messages here and there, you know, basically to tell me I asked a great question. But anyway, shout out Joe Rogan.
So, you know, he had some people on there talking about psychedelics, and then I listened to Sean Ryan's show, and you know, it was a tier 1 guy, you know, that had come on there, Marcus Capone, and hearing his story and hearing, to sum up that story in like 2 sentences, tier 1 operator, major TBI, PTSD, just like really damaged. Oh my gosh, I think I'm going to kill myself. Life is falling apart. And then like last ditch effort, his wife's like, let's try this thing. And he was like, and then he goes and he does it, and it like totally transforms his life. And it's, so their organization is called VETS, VETS, Veterans Exploring Treatment Solutions. There's another really powerful one called Heroic Hearts. So VETS tends to lean a little bit more towards soft, and Heroic Hearts is kind of like open their doors to everybody. But this is what's so crazy. it's so crazy, is number one, we're seeing that this stuff actually works, right? There are actual studies being done. There's a big organization called MAPS, and they're doing studies at Harvard and Stanford, and the results are like mind-boggling. It's unbelievable how in a clinical setting, pairing it with the proper integration and the proper techniques and all that stuff, like the results that it is having for these veterans. But it's mind-boggling that they have to go to another country.
Well, thankfully, so I want to say Kentucky, the Kentucky senator, or Kentucky is like the first time they have $75 million earmarked to study specifically ibogaine. So ibogaine is a plant-based medicine. What they're finding for vets, for PTSD, for whatever, number one, it's creating new pathways in the brain that circumvent the damaged parts by PTSD. And number two, people are doing an unintended secondary consequence that we just don't understand fully yet. They're having people go in for this ibogaine treatment, and afterwards they have zero desire to do long addiction items. They wake up the next day and they don't want to drink, 100%. They're finding it for drug treatment, both fentanyl, like opioids, which is why it's originating in Kentucky. People with lifelong fentanyl addictions are waking up the next day and without any withdrawal symptoms at all are just turning it off and going, I don't want to do that anymore. I just feel completely different. And it's snapping them out of long held addiction. So this is gaining traction across the country. Like ketamine, it takes, months of treatment and you have to be guided through it. Some of the other psychedelics, psilocybin takes, guided meditation and practice through the entire program. And it takes, months. They're finding ibogaine with a single treatment or sometimes two. Not only is it completely breaking addiction, but it's rewiring your neural pathways in a way that we just can't even fully understand. So it's actually gaining traction. It's actually getting some studies now. The first human study was approved, and I want to say $75 million got earmarked for it out of Kentucky. So it's crazy, and it's backed by Marcus Luttrell from Operation. It was Operation Red Wings. Yeah, Red Wings, like the lone survivor guy. His twin brother is actually in a senator, and he used ibogaine and DMT, and it completely. He's like, I woke up a different person. It saved my life. It saved my marriage. It saved my brain, essentially.
Well, here's what's so crazy, and I think it's something that I've just generally learned in my life as through personal experiences. Like when I really think that I know something and I've got a pretty strong opinion on something, give it about 4 or 5 years and it's probably going to change. And so, I think with the psychedelic thing, because the programming for the last 50 years has been super negative towards psychedelics, right? Like it'll ruin you. It'll make you hallucinate and want to jump off of a building. It'll, you're just going to become this total druggie. It's basically only for Woodstock and Woodstock only, right? And nowadays it's only for EDC or something like that, right? And it's people using it recreationally, and that's bad and you shouldn't do that. But that's, I guess, what I would invite you, listener, or just invite somebody to do is try once to just box up those preconceived notions and listen to some of the work that's being done. Listen to that Marcus Capone story. If you want to change your opinion, right? This is a dude that was squared away and he had to be convinced to go do it. And it saved his life. I won't go into this whole story, but, it was very similar. I was raised LDS, like I said earlier. My little brother struggled basically his whole life with chronic depression, but not just depression, OCD, depressive disorder. Those are two really not good things to pair on each other, right? And high anxiety, whatever, really was approaching the scariest peak. And we ended up getting him into some ketamine therapy because it was the only thing available, right? And it was so we just out of pocket paid for it. He went up and did it. But what was so interesting about it, the reason I bring it up is because prior to that, I had been beating that war drum because I was seeing what was happening, but I was also learning about psychedelics. And I had been beating that war drum and I was kind of getting a lot of pushback, specifically from my mom. Love you, Mom. But it was just it was
she
so
also
foreign.
Listens to the podcast. So no big deal. Your mom and Joe Rogan.
But it's, there was a lot of pushback. And I just remember she'd kind of make these sly comments or these kind of like, oh, the psychedelics, man. But it was like, there's no way. And then as it approached a peak, the scariest peak or valley of depression. Anyway, it was like, she got to a point where she was like, I will try anything, right? Like, I don't care what it is, let's try it. And she saw some YouTube video where she was seeing like normal people, a plumber, and Dave down the street who had gone through ketamine assisted therapy. And they were just like sharing their experience of how it helped them. And she was like, oh, this isn't just a bunch of stoners, right? And the beautiful thing, to put a bow on that, is, well, because no politician wants to be on the wrong side of history there and vote against supporting something that could be potentially life-changing for the veteran population. So there's a lot of, what's the right word? Bilateral support. I don't know the actual word, but there's like support from everybody on both sides of the aisle. And so it's finally starting to get funding. It's finally starting to get traction. There's big names popping up, whether it's celebrities, politicians, big name, veterans that everybody knows, like Marcus Luttrell and his brother. And it's finally starting to become this like very accepted and kind of like welcome change that really, I think it could change society as a whole if it continues down this path.
Yeah.
So Veterans Exploring Treatment Solutions and Heroic Hearts are two of the big dogs that I would look up.
Yeah. So I'm taking notes, right? And I got the Veterans one, Exploring Treatment Solutions, but it's the other one, the Heroic Hearts, that I kind of like missed.
Yeah.
So want to talk to you because you also wrote a book, which I think is an extremely challenging task. In fact, when I think about writing a book, I'm like, I'm probably good there. I'll just talk unless I have voice dictation or something like that. And then maybe I could write a book, but I just talk. So tell us about your book.
Yeah. Well, it's not a very exciting book. It's not like
that's not the way to sell it. You got to start over. We got to go back. We don't edit anything out, but let's pretend like he asked you about.
This will change your life. All right.
There we go. Sell, my dude.
Yeah. So this book is not about gun shipping. It's not about my time in service. It's not about that. The reason I decided to write this book is actually it started with just my social media. Basically, when I was separating, I had this idea. I was like, oh, man, this will be awesome. I'm moving from New Mexico to Colorado Springs. I'll get up there. I'll use my VA loan. I'll buy a house. It was like great timing too. Well, it was decent timing. And I was like, I'll buy a house and it'll be sweet. And then I'll have another investment property and like blah, blah, blah. And then my lender, he just kind of like giggled and patted me on the head. And he was like, that's cute. That's not how that works. And I was like, why not? He was like, because you have a separation date on your LES, because you don't have orders there, because you're not going into a similar job. And he started kind of like laying out these things. And I was like, oh, no. Additionally, I was on a trip with him one time. And basically, long story super short, he had some guy that was like separating and basically kind of did the same thing, although he was much further through the loan process. Like they had put an offer on a house already. And like, he was just operating under this idea that like, oh, I've got the VA loan, which is like one of the most insane benefits of being in the military that is like so underappreciated, but it's awesome. And I was like, okay. So I started kind of doing these videos on Instagram and on the old TikTok machine so that the Chinese could learn about the VA loan as well. And they started getting huge traction because it wasn't just like, what is the VA loan? It was like, this is a gotcha. And I realized there's a lot of gotchas. You can go onto the Google machine and like go to the VA's website and it'll tell you about the VA loan. Like, sure. But like, what about these like little weird scenarios that I went from aviation to real estate, or a pilot that's going from flying, but he's going to the airlines? Or what about an entrepreneur? How does that, or somebody that, there was all these little like gotchas. So eventually I was like, okay, like I would start getting all these DMs and people asking these questions. And I just realized, a little bit selfishly, but I was like, man, this would be nice if I had something that I could just offer this person that was not long. It's like less than 25 pages. It's written, very, very simply. It's not technical. There's a bunch of charts and graphs in there and whatever, but it's really just like frequently asked questions. And before, I wanted to make sure that if I was putting something out, especially if I was putting something out there with my name on it, that it would provide value and it wasn't just some self-aggrandizing thing or something that was just going to like waste people's time. So I sent it to a couple of my friends who are about to buy their first home. So a friend that's about to buy his first, two friends that are buying their first, another guy that just in this last year closed out his first. And the feedback that I got was like, oh, man, I wish I would have had this before. Or like, dude, this helped me understand because it's the biggest purchase of like your whole life. You're spending $200,000 to $700,000 on a home and you like barely understand this thing and then how to like leverage it and leverage the opportunity. And that's what I also want to provide because, if you don't retire, you don't really have any passive income, right? So like if you can understand a little bit more about the VA loan and how you can leverage it and how you can take advantage of the opportunity that it is. Because here's the thing is like nobody did that for me, including my realtor who could have sold me a bunch of homes had I just known, had she just called me and been like, we need to talk. We're going to strategize so that you can build, so that you can change your financial future. That would have been like so awesome. So that's really like what I don't want to say dedicated my life to, but like I really love the opportunity to talk to service members and veterans that are like, they've just never done it. Be like, yo, this is awesome. Let me hook it up. So that's how I ended up writing this little book. And I'll provide you guys the link. It's just a free ebook. Like, I'm not charging anybody for it because it's like, it's all publicly available knowledge. I just happen to put it together in a better format. So
you speak vet. Yeah.
Yeah.
You speak
I don't know.
Vet.
You speak better. I don't know. I would have charged something for it, man, because that resource, having it in one place and doing the work as we've all bought homes on this podcast, and even Trent, which is surprising to everybody. He actually has purchased multiple homes in his life. So, that's a resource that, I won't even pretend like I know the ins and outs of anything VA related, the VA medical, maze that you have to go through, and the VA loans. Like, there's a ton of things that you've earned through your military service, and just so I can put it out in the world, like whether you serve 20 years or whether you serve one enlistment, that service is still valuable. Like, there is no ranking of service. So when you earn those things, like, you should be able to leverage them. So, man, Kyle, it feels like a good place to close. I'm going to ask you the same question that we ask every single one of our guests. For everybody that's listening out there that's trying to do something, military service, special operations, any flavor of what it is that we do, those things can feel impossible, man. So to those people that are preparing and want to get into this sort of thing, what piece of advice would you give them to help them on their journey?
Oh, man.
Got him.
That's such a good
Joe Rogan's like, Aaron, great question.
Aaron, great question. I'm going to go back to what I said earlier about digging down and figuring out my core values. I think what catches a lot of people, especially in your guys' line of work, or just when they start entering into like difficult things like a pipeline, is what maybe the why is not strong enough. Maybe they're doing it for clout. Maybe they're doing it for just because it sounds cool or sounds neat or whatever. But I think you can really set yourself up for success in life if you take the time to dig down and like spend some time in your thoughts and in your feels and figure out what your core values are, and then operate based off of that and make decisions based off of that. Because then that like there is truth and authenticity in what you're doing. And it'll also help you identify if there's not. And it'll help you make course corrections and changes when you're like, this feels incongruent with what I project to be the highest and best version of myself. Right. Now, that being said, as life goes on, I can think of a couple monumental moments in my life where who I thought I was revealed to me that maybe I wasn't quite that. Maybe I wasn't as good of a person, or maybe I wasn't as invincible, or maybe I didn't react to a scenario with the type of grace or strength that I thought that I was going to reply with. And those situations can be pretty intense and rock you pretty good. But I'll tell you, even when that happened, I was able to look back at those core values and just like assess and be like, man, but I still know who I am. I just am experiencing life and still doing some growth. So that's kind of how I would approach it. You know, the pipelines are long, whether it's the AFSPEC war or getting into aviation in general, or it's getting into business. If you can really narrow down like who you are and be really comfortable with yourself and that process of self-discovery, and then ultimately stack it with a pretty solid why, I think whether you're successful or not in accomplishing that goal, you'll be successful in, like I said, staying congruent to who you are and who you're trying to become.
Well said, man. For everybody out there, Kyle, where can they find you on the Instagrams, YouTubes, or anything else you got? Where should people look for you?
Yeah. Most active on the Instagram machine at KJ Petitt, Petitt. Same on the old TikTok machine. Those are probably the two best. And then in the link in my bio, that's where you can get a copy of the ebook, which, like I said, is free, and feel free to share it with your friends. And, I just want people to have the information.
Outstanding.
And if you ever
can't say thanks enough.
If you ever move to Colorado Springs, is where I'm at. So holler at me and we'll grab a water.
There you go. Now you know a guy. Kyle, thanks for coming on, man. Thanks for your service. We appreciate everything that you're doing. So for everybody else out there, go check out KJ Petitt over on Instagram and find his awesome free ebook. So that's a service to everybody out there. We appreciate it. Make sure to like, subscribe, follow. Feels like it's time to close this one up. So we appreciate it. Everybody have a good one. Train hard. We will see you next time.